let's get started. At the end, I'll also talk a little about the post-laryngectomy voice rehab. So when we talk about surgical anatomy, it's not just the structure, but it's the functional anatomy also which needs to be understood. And what we study is not just the larynx, but where the larynx is placed. So the structures around it, because it needs to function in coordination with the structures around it, which are mainly the pharyngeal structures, the oropharynx and the hypopharynx, as well as the soft tissues of the neck. And the functional part is about so this function. It's all about coordinated working of the larynx and structures around it. Embryologically, the larynx develops from two distinct originators. Uh, the foregut gives rise to the airway and the food passage, that's the trachea and esophagus. And to this is added the supraglottic larynx. So the glottis, subglottis, and trachea develop as parts of the foregut. And this is then reinforced by a buccopharyngeal contribution, the brachial arches, pharyngeal arches. So, like the pharyngoesophageal sphincter, the larynx can be considered a pharyngotracheal sphincter, and both of them develop from the foregut. So the larynx, like the general plan elsewhere in the body, has a skeleton, which is would be layered by muscles, which drive the movements of the joints of the skeleton, and the muscles are then covered by an investing connective tissue layer, which we call membranes in the case of larynx, and over it is the epithelial lining. So if you, because we'll talk about laryngeal compartments, it is easy if we have analogy of the compartments of soft tissues of the thigh. The only difference is that here the skeleton is on the outside. If you look at the compartments of, say, the thigh, you have the femur, then you have the investing muscles, the muscles surrounding it which move it, the different joints to which the femur articulates. And then you have an investing layer of deep fascia, which we call fascia lata, which again throws intermuscular septa, which and these layers of connective tissue are very important barriers to spread of cancers to the deeper layers from the epithelium. So under the lining of the supraglottic, glottic, and subglottic areas, if there is a connective tissue layer which is resistant to spread of cancer, the deeper framework which comprises the muscles and the exoskeleton, the larynx is an exoskeleton, they would be protected. The laryngeal function is dependent not only on an intrinsic mechanism but also an extrinsic. The intrinsic mechanism is the sphincteric action, which, like the pharyngoesophageal valve, it primarily functions to control the ingress and egress of contents from and to the pharynx, pharynx to trachea and trachea to pharynx. The primary function of the larynx, therefore, is to protect the airway, at which time the sphincter is fully closed. So we are talking about the sphincteric function of larynx. And this is a two-tiers protection. We have the supraglottis, which also has some sphincteric action, and the main is at the glottic level. Phonation is the second function, which is also done by the sphincter itself, in which the sphincter is nearly closed. when it prevents an ingress, the sphincter is fully closed. When it allows an egress and phonation, the sphincter is partially closed or nearly closed. But in breathing, allowing nasal and pharyngeal airway to go into the trachea, which is humidified and warm air, the sphincter is fully open. You see, all the three functions, the primary and the secondary functions, are related to the sphincteric action of the pharynx, of the larynx. And this occurs at the supraglottic level and the glottic level. Now, like I said, the larynx has an exoskeleton that is formed by the hyoid, you can say. Hyoid is the only bone in the body which has no other articulation with any other bone. Then you have the thyroid cartilage and you have the cricoid cartilage. Between the epiglottis, which is attached here to the thyroid cartilage, and the hyoid, the thyroid membrane, and the thyroid cartilage, is the pre-epiglottic space which lies in front of it and which is usually filled with fat and a lot of lymphatics, and it's a vascular region. It's Then we have the glottis and the subglottis. You would notice that the cricoid, if you this is the vocal process of arytenoid, and this is the vocal ligament, what we call the vocal cord, as it is covered by the epithelium and the vocal cord there. So here, the distance between the vocal process of arytenoid and cricoid is less, but anteriorly, the distance between the uh, anterior commission, that's the anterior part of the vocal cord, and the cricoid is much more. Now, this is very important uh, because we shall see how important the cricoid is to any voice preserving procedures. Like I said, we have the exoskeleton, then we have the muscles. So, at this level are the most important muscles, which are the thyroarytenoideus, which forms the bulk of the vocalis ligament with which we phonate. And then you have the thyroepiglotticus uh, and other muscles which are attached to the cricoid and arytenoids. So we have
Mm,
posterior cricoarytenoid and the transverse and oblique arytenoids. They are all so all these muscles are here. And the superficial to the muscles towards the laryngeal lumen, then we have connective tissue uh, barriers between the mucosa and the muscles. So here in the supraglottis, we have the quadrangular membrane. It's attached here, arytenoid, epiglottis, thyroid. So this is the quadrangular membrane which prevents the spread of uh, cancers from supraglottic mucosa to the laryngeal framework, the exoskeleton and muscles from the framework. And here we have the vocal ligament, which is attached. The thickened part of it is called the vocal ligament, and uh, here it is attached to the arytenoid, thyroid, and the cricoid, which prevents escape of disease from the glottic mucosa to this space which contains the muscle. So this space is called the paraglottic space, and this is called the pre-epiglottic space. You'll see that there is a gap between this, which is the vestibular false all false vocal cord, and the glottis, and this is called the ventricle. And this doesn't have any barrier. Above is the quadrangular membrane. Below is the vocal ligament and membrane, and in between there is a gap. So tumors which arise primarily in the ventricle can easily escape into the paraglottic space and the epiglottic space. Now, laryngeal function. also has an extrinsic, dependent upon some extrinsic factors. So swallowing is a coordinated reflex between the pharyngoesophageal swallowing reflex and the extrinsic laryngeal musculature, which pulls it up. So the tongue goes back, the base tongue, and the larynx comes up and forward, and they impinge upon each other. And in between, the epiglottis gets sandwiched. So the tongue base and the laryngeal aperture get opposed, and that's the first layer of protection against aspiration and anything going to the airway. So even if you remove the epiglottis, like if you insert a paper here, a cover, a lid here, it's just a lid. Epiglottis doesn't have any other great function here. You can still preserve the protective function of the larynx if the two can get opposed, the base tongue and the larynx can get opposed effectively. So the extrinsic laryngeal musculature uh, uh, which helps to pull the larynx up, is very important in preventing swallowing dysfunction. The breathing, which comes from the nose, also helps in olfaction and taste. So if we lose nasal breathing, olfaction and taste functions will also get affected. And phonation is therefore the only truly exclusively intrinsic laryngeal function. But speech also requires the vocal tract. So voice can be produced at the glottic or supraglottic level, but uh, speech, which is articulation, resonance, and so many other attributes, requires the vocal tract, which is formed by the pharynx, oropharynx, the hypopharynx, and the oral cavity. All of them contribute to speech. So the normal function is achieved like this. Swallowing, the backward movement of base of trunk, which is an extrinsic function. Upward movement of the larynx, which is an extrinsic function, or dependent upon extrinsic structures. So even if we lose some parts of the larynx, we can preserve the swallowing. And sphincteric action of supraglottis and glottis is the second layer, the second tier protection, which is an intrinsic function, and the coordinated pharyngoesophageal valve, which again is the extrinsic function. Phonation is entirely a laryngeal function, which occurs primarily by sphincteric action at the glottis. It needs lung-powered air, that is very important. Some sphincteric action can be provided by the supraglottis, and of course, we need the vocal tract to have a proper speech with its resonance and a proper amplitude. And for nasal breathing, we need an required ring, which is the only complete ring in the entire airway, so that it maintains the patency of the airway. It provides the rostrum on which the rest of the larynx rests, and it provides the support from which the trachea uh, hangs. The tracheal cartilages are incomplete and they can collapse during breathing. So, required has an important function of maintaining an adequate airway at that level. The entire concept of laryngeal preservation, partial laryngectomies, is based upon these different functions on different parts, as well as the embryological compartmentalization of the larynx, so that tumors which arise from one embryological component generally do not spread to the rest. So supraglottic laryngeal cancers, if they spread laterally, that's the mucosal spread, they get halted at the ventricle, and the radial spread gets contained by barriers to spread, which are the quadrangular membrane and the vocal membrane. And if they transgress the pre-epiglottic space and the paraglottic space, they can still not easily invade the exoskeleton, the cartilages, by the protection of the perichondrium. But in all this, there are vulnerable areas. So the lower half of epiglottis, which is called the epiglottic petiole, and which attaches to the thyroid cartilage has many deficiencies, small holes, and the junction between the epiglottic space and the paraglottic space, it doesn't have an intervening membrane. The tumors which involve the pre-epiglottic space extensively can easily spill over on the sides of the epiglottis into the paraglottic space. This again is very similar to the compartmentalization in the thigh, where tumors of the posterior and medial compartment can cross over to the other compartment because the intermuscular septum is not very strong there. And then we come to the anterior commissure. The anterior commissure is where the two vocal cords will meet, and these are attached to the thyroid cartilage, to the angle of thyroid cartilage by a connective tissue ligament, a tendinous structure which is called the Broad's ligament or the anterior commissure ligament. So this is a very tough structure, and it prevents tumor spread into it. But once it is involved, the thyroid cartilage can get easily invaded because at this point there is no perichondrium where the Broad's ligament attaches to the thyroid cartilage. Also, once this Broad's ligament is invaded, the tumor can get easy access into the pre-epiglottic space as well as into the paraglottic space. So if the tendon here, the Broad's ligament, is involved, then the thyroid cartilage can be invaded, the pre-epiglottic space can be invaded, and the paraglottic space can be invaded. So these are the three important vulnerable areas which we must know. And this involvement is very difficult to assess endoscopically and radiologically. So the tumors which involve the anterior commissure need some special consideration. The metastatic spread, again, is related to the embryological development. So the supraglottis has a lot of lymphatics and has bilateral lymphatic spread, while the glottis is devoid of lymphatics. And unless cancers are advanced, they do not spread. Laryngeal and hypopharyngeal cancers also are biologically different. Hypopharyngeal cancers have a tendency to spread submucosally and have skipped metastasis within the surrounding mucosa uh, lesions, which is not generally seen in laryngeal cancers. So if you look at coming back to this, tumors which are confined to the supraglottis are supraglottic cancers. Tumors which are confined to the glottis, so maybe one cord, both cords, or anterior commissure, posterior commissure, they are glottic cancers. Tumors which are confined, which involve the subglottis. Primary tumors of the subglottis are extremely rare. They usually occur by extension of the glottic cancer. But tumors which involve the supraglottis and the glottis obviously have to traverse across the ventricle, and these are called transglottic cancers. Obviously, they involve the paraglottic space. So this is the quadrangular membrane I was talking about, which lies just under the supraglottic mucosa and is a barrier to deeper spread. And this is the conus elasticus. The thickened part is called the vocal ligament, and this is a barrier to deeper spread of glottic cancers. So that is how the vestibular and the vocal folds are formed, the conus elasticus and the quadrangular membrane. And these deeper spaces are protected by the presence of these connective tissue barriers. Whole organ serial sections have shown that in the supraglottis, they get halted supraglottic, the mucosal spread gets halted at the ventricle and or anterior commissure, and only transglottic cancers would involve the glottis, and they are involved in glottis, supraglottis, and paraglottic space. And in supraglottic tumors, generally even large tumors do not invade the thyroidella. So if you make a cut across the thyroid cartilage, For supraglottic laryngectomy, it's oncologically safe if the lower edge of the visible tumor does not cross the anterior commissure of the ventricle. We saw how the ventricle and the anterior commissure are weak areas. Hypopharyngeal cancers, if they extend laterally, they would involve the thyroid ala. Medially and anterior to the pariform sinus, the medial wall and the anterior angle, they would grow directly into the paraglottic space. And anterior to the post-cricoid area is the lamina cricoid and the posterior cricoarytenoid joint. So this is how hypopharyngeal cancers would involve the larynx. The pariform fossa and the post-cricoid cancers are especially liable to involve the larynx. So the reflection here of the hypopharyngeal mucosa is the pariform, and the mucosa here behind the cricoid lamina is the postcricoid. We often talk about the apex of the pariform. So this part of the pariform fossa, the upper part, which corresponds to the A fold and the area corresponding to the quadrangular membrane is the membranous pariform, and the lower part, which is called the apex, is overlies the paraglottic space and abuts the cricoid. So that is why tumors which involve the apex of the pariform are liable to invade the laryngeal framework, the paraglottic space, as well as the postcricoid, as well as the cricoid cartilage, and that is why they are less liable to be amenable to a voice-preserving laryngectomy. And post-acquired cancers, they directly abut the posterior cricoarytenoid muscle and the cricoid lamina, and therefore they are liable to spread to the larynx easily. So when we talk about voice-preserving laryngectomy, we generally imply an open partial laryngectomy. And I have added that terminology in the current era because a lot of things have changed from the time when these procedures were first described. So open, partial, and current era. Open is something which creates a path to uninvolved normal tissues of the neck for access and dissection. So we disturb a lot of uninvolved normal tissues just for access and dissection. Is because scarring there, which would because we have understood that structures outside the larynx are equally important for proper function of the larynx and the pharyngoesophageal swallowing reflex. So all these structures, when they are disturbed, they can affect the laryngeal function. And there are other rare approaches which we would not touch upon today. Partial, when we say partial, it means a partial anatomic loss, but it means a full functional preservation. So a truly voice preserving laryngectomy preserves not only the speech, but the important function of swallowing, which is aspiration free, and provides an adequate airway which permits nasal breathing. When all these functions are preserved, it's called a partial voice preserving laryngectomy. What is the permissible partial loss? There are variable extents of swallowing elements and speech elements which can be lost when we do a partial laryngectomy. So the swallowing elements we have learned are the epiglottis, AE folds, the false chords, the two chords which give the sphincteric action, and the hyoid and base tongue complex. We know that it is the opposition of the tongue base and the laryngeal vestibule which prevents aspiration. And we need to preserve one arytenoid because the sphincteric action is brought about by movement of the arytenoids. If both are lost, there is complete loss of the sphincteric action. And we need to preserve the speech elements, at least one vocal fold, the vocalis muscle, which is the part of the thyroarytenoideus, on one side and one arytenoid. So only if we can preserve some of these, we can do a voice preserving laryngectomy. The limiting factors of towards a voice preserving laryngectomy. So the swallowing element, if you remove the base tongue, we cannot do a voice preserving partial laryngectomy because the swallowing is severely disturbed. Speech element, lung powered air. So if you cannot use lung powered air for phonation, it is not truly a voice preserving laryngectomy. And for both adequate for both swallowing, speech, and adequate nasal breathing, all the three functions, we need to have an intact required arch, complete required arch, and at least one arytenoid soil. So this is the basis of doing a partial laryngectomy. You need to preserve the tongue base. You can resect a part limited on one side, but it severely disturbs the swallowing. The hyoid can be resected in some cases, but it's very unusual for the hyoid bone to be involved, and most of the time it can be preserved. So if you can preserve this, you preserve swallowing. If you can preserve the sphincteric action and provide lung powered air, you can preserve speech, and this is the rostrum on which the entire larynx rests. So the preservation of the entire cricoid and at least one cricoid is the fundamental of one voice preserving laryngectomy. So all partial laryngectomies, to reiterate, are variable amounts of resection of some but not all of the swallowing elements, of some or most of the speech elements, which preserve the cricoid arch, at least one functioning cricoarytenoid joint, and lung powered airflow and nasopharyngeal airway. So total and partial laryngectomy, how do we manage the loss of each function? When we do a total laryngectomy, all functions are lost. So you have to reconstruct the pharynx and restore swallowing. You have to divert the tracheal opening and create a vibratory element if you want to preserve uh, if you want to restore voice and speech. In a partial laryngectomy, if the swallowing is to restore swallowing, we must have an adequate laryngeal elevation, a supraglottic, that is arytenoid reconstruction, and what is generally not mentioned is that we need to carefully preserve the hypoglossal nerve because the entire movement of the tongue depends upon the hypoglossal nerves. They lie very close to the hyoid cornu and the superior cornu of thyroid cartilage. So when we are operating in this region, we must be careful that we do not damage any of the hypoglossal nerves. For restoration of phonation, we can do a glottic reconstruction, and obviously for nasal breathing, we have to preserve the complete word ring. We cannot. There is no way to restore that generally. This slide, I believe, is the key to understanding when you can do a voice preserving partial laryngectomy. So we have T1, T2, T3, T4 cancers. Supraglottic, T1, T2, very amenable to voice preservation. T3, T4 selected cases can be amenable to voice preservation. Same with glottis, but subglottis, because it's so close to the cricoid, you cannot practically you never do a voice preserving laryngectomy. Same for post-cricoid, like we saw on that diagram. Pariform, uh, membranous pariform, maybe you can do that, but apex of pariform, again, the larynx is at risk because it abuts the paraglottic space in the cricoid cartilage. Posterior pharyngeal wall based and varicula and thyroid cancers can also be resected, preserving the larynx. So you see that in all these red areas where the larynx is threatened when you need to do a total laryngectomy are all the cancers where the cricoid lamina, that's the posterior part of the cricoid, is threatened. So if you have to do a checklist on whether I can do a partial laryngectomy, voice preserving laryngectomy in any patient, how do I go about it? So I look at patient factors. We treat patients, not tumors. So the patient should have adequate pulmonary status because initially the functions are going to get disturbed. Patient would have aspiration, and patient should have a good pulmonary function to generate a good cough and lung-powered speech, and must have adequate neuromuscular function in this area, including hand and coordination, to manage their temporary tracheostomy. Tumor factors required involved. Yes, not possible. No, yes. We go to next level, subglottis. We start from below. Required is free. Subglottis is free. Posterior midline is free. One cricoid arytenoid joint is free, and there is no extra framework disease. The disease doesn't go out of the laryngeal framework. There is no involvement outside of the thyroid external perichondrium or the hyoid, then only or across the thyrohyoid membrane. So if all these criteria are met, we know that this patient can be offered a voice preserving laryngectomy. Now, which type of voice preserving laryngectomy depends upon where the tumor is situated. Whether it would be a supraglottic, which is a horizontal laryngectomy, or a vertical laryngectomy, uh, which is for glottic cancers. Why do we do a horizontal laryngectomy for supraglottic cancers and a vertical for uh, glottic cancers? Because the glottis develops in two parts, from one from each side, and supraglottis develops from a single and large. So supraglottic cancers would spread to both sides, while glottic cancers would generally remain confined to one side, unless the midline is infiltrated. So, what are the indications? Having understood the basic mechanism and the structural requirements of which area are involved, which are not involved, uh, how do we come to choosing patients for voice preserving laryngectomy? So, we have disease without framework involvement and disease with framework involvement. So, this is an early disease and this is a moderately advanced disease. Diseases which are outside the framework are an extremely advanced set of diseases, and they are generally not amenable to a voice preserving laryngectomy. So now, if we look at supraglottic and glottic cancers, for T1 and T2 supraglottic cancers, we can do a supraglottic horizontal laryngectomy and maybe an extended supraglottic laryngectomy. For T3, T4, we need to do a supracricoid laryngectomy and sometimes extended supraglottic horizontal laryngectomy suffice. For glottic early cancers, we can do a vertical partial laryngectomy. There are various forms, and that's frontal, lateral, frontolateral, and a lot of modifications of vertical hemilaryngectomies have been described. We will not go into details there. And for some T2 tumors, you may need to do supracricoid laryngectomy. And for T3 and T4, T3 is involvement of the inner perichondrium without extensive thyroid cartilage invasion. And for certain T4 tumors where the external perichondrium of thyroid cartilage is not breached, you can still do a supracricoid laryngectomy because this is a procedure in which the entire the thyroid ala is removed. I have put an asterisk here about T3 glottic cancers and some T4 where the paraglottic space is involved. The reason is that we have seen that the anterior angle of the pariform sinus uh, and the medial wall, they abut the paraglottic space. And when we do a supracricoid laryngectomy, preserve You dissect the pariform mucosa away from the larynx. The entire paraglottic space itself is removed, but the posterior boundary, the covering over it, which is formed by the pariform fossa mucosa, is preserved. So there you could come very close to the tumor. So studies have been carried out to see whether it is safe to preserve the pariform mucosa. And yes, unless the paraglottic space is involved right up to the pariform mucosa, and you would be able to see that by some mucosal changes in the pariform sinus. Uh, those are cases where you cannot do a suprathecal laryngectomy. So some people have reservations about doing a suprathecal laryngectomy for involvement of the paraglottic space for this. Uh, so coming to each type of laryngectomy, the horizontal supraglottic laryngectomy. We must remember that all supraglottic laryngectomies, because they are being done for at least T2 tumors, and they have a significant risk of lymphatic spread to both sides of the neck. So if a neck disease is very much advanced and a radical neck dissection is needed on both the sides, we cannot do a supraglottic laryngectomy because of the uh, consequent edema and dysfunction, and we would never be able to really preserve the function, even though, restore the function, even though we have preserved part of the larynx. So a bilateral radical neck dissection is a contraindication to performing a supraglottic laryngectomy. So what it does, it removes the entire pre-epiglottic space which lies between the epiglottis, hyoid, hyrohyoid membrane, and the upper half of the thyroid cartilage. So anteriorly we have these structures, and behind this is the epiglottis, and between the two is the pre-epiglottic space. So it can remove the entire pre-epiglottic space. So that would be a T3 supraglottic cancer if it involves that. It is done, and therefore it is done for T1 to T3 supraglottic cancers. But it cuts across. We know the paraglottic space here and the pre-epiglottic space communicate at the sides. So it cuts across the paraglottic space, and therefore it is not suitable for a transglottic cancer. With a transglottic cancer is one which uh, crosses from supraglottis to glottis across the ventricle. So if the ventricle is involved, we cannot do a supraglottic laryngectomy. What does it remove? It removes the epiglottis, the AE folds, the false cords, and the upper half of the thyroid cartilage. So we see that the even though we call it a supraglottic horizontal laryngectomy, we are not cutting across and removing both the arytenoids. So in that case, it is a little of a misnomer because main sphincteric action occurs at the arytenoid joint, and we have to preserve at least one arytenoid. So if the mucosa over the arytenoid is involved, you can remove one arytenoid, but not if the midline is involved. The involvement, so tumor which, reiterating, tumor which are close or abut the cricoid and the midline, posterior midline, are not suitable for any kind of a any kind of a partial ending. Since it removes the swallowing elements, the main morbidity of a supraglottic laryngectomy is a swallowing disorder, which is aspiration. For functional restoration, we need to restore that swallowing mechanism by bringing the larynx. Now, we have to bridge this gap between the tongue base, which is lies here, and the remaining larynx. So we have to bring the larynx up and bring it closer to the tongue base. It can be suspended to the tongue base itself. If the hyoid has been preserved, which can be done in some supraglottic laryngectomies, you can easily suspend it to the hyoid, or you will have to suspend it to the mandible. And that way, you again bring the tongue base and the remaining larynx close, and that is how you slowly restore. And patients over a period of few weeks can come back to aspiration-free swallowing. Vertical partial laryngectomy is vertical because the two sides of glottis uh, are derived from independent sides. So we can cut vertically on one side and preserve the other side. So they remove the lateral anterior anterolateral glottis. One arytenoid can be removed. Indication are for T1 and T2 glottic cancer. It cuts through the paraglottic space. The paraglottic space would be here. So vertical laryngectomy is cut through the paraglottic space, and therefore they are not suitable for T3 glottic tumors, which is basically involved in the paraglottic space. They are not suitable for posterior commissure tumors because then the cricoid and both the cricoid joints are threatened. So tumors which involve the posterior commissure are basically not uh, here or posterior postcricoid here. Here, they are not amenable to any kind of partial laryngectomy. They have to be treated by radiation or chemoradiation if you want to do a laryngeal preservation for a functioning larynx. So, contraindications are T3 tumors, interarytenoid involvement, and posterior commissure involvement, and significant subglottic involvement. We have seen that anteriorly we have a larger margin of up to 1 centimeter, and posteriorly just 5 millimeters of subglottic extension, which is permitted. And beyond that, if there is tumor extension, then the cricoid gets threatened, and we have to preserve the cricoid. So more than 1 centimeter anteriorly, more than 5 millimeters posteriorly, it would be contraindication. Since this removes the speech elements, the main morbidity is voice quality. But because the sphincteric action also helps in preventing aspiration, there could be some aspiration initially, especially if the main one of the main mechanisms for preventing aspiration, that is the arytenoid, is also removed. So whenever an arytenoid is removed in a vertical partial laryngectomy, you must always try and reconstruct that. So if you are doing an extended dissection, removing an arytenoid, because these are patients who are going to land up with significant aspiration, you must replace the arytenoid. There are various means. You can do it with using the native thyroid cartilage itself. Uh, and to improve the voice quality, you can do a glottic reconstruction. So it is the voice quality. One side is preserved, so speech is not lost, but it is a whispering kind of voice. And to improve that, you can do a glottic reconstruction. Again, there are various methods to do that. Supracricoid laryngectomy. Supracricoid, which means again we are sparing the cricoid. So in this, the entire thyroid cartilage, the cut is made under the hyoid and above the cricoid, and you remove everything in between except the arytenoid and the cricoid. So preserving the cricoid and arytenoid again is the key, and then you have to bridge the gap. Again, bridge the gap between the base tongue hyoid complex and the remnant larynx. You have to bridge the gap. That will take care of the swallowing. The vibratory movements produced by the arytenoid, even though the chords are lost, they will give you the phonation. And the base tongue would fall upon the arytenoid here, and that will cover the larynx and prevent aspiration over a period of time. It may take some time to decannulate this patient. So all voice preserving laryngectomies, whether it is horizontal supraglottic, whether it is vertical partial, or whether it is supracricoid, they would all need a temporary tracheostomy. The earliest decannulation occurs in vertical partial laryngectomy, frontal or a lateral hemilaryngectomy, because aspiration is not a problem here. But supraglottic horizontal laryngectomies and supracricoid laryngectomies would require at least not less than 6 weeks, mostly, of tracheostomy. And some About 5% can end up with a permanent tracheostomy. In supraglottic horizontal laryngectomy, that would happen because of persistent uh, aspiration. And in supracricoid laryngectomies, they may end up with a permanent tracheostomy, unplanned, because of either a persistent aspiration or a very edematous subglottic mucosa. This, what you preserve, is the subglottis, and this is a complete ring, so it cannot expand more than what is already there. And if persistent edema is there, then they would end up with needing a tracheostomy for breathing as well. When does that occur? That occurs when you have added postoperative radiation to these patients. Why do we need radiation? We need radiation because many of these patients could be having a lot of nodal disease. So the primary itself is adequately dissected, doesn't need addition of radiation, but nodal spread may need radiation, and these are the patients who may end up finally with permanent tracheostomy. So supracricoid laryngectomy we saw removes the entire thoraidella, both paraglottic spaces and partial or total pre-epiglottic space, anterior membranous subglottis, and one arytenoid, if need be. Ideally, both should be preserved. Indication is T1B to T2 glottis. Selected T3 glottis, we discussed that because the pariform lies at the posterior margin of the paraglottic space, and limited T4 glottic. Limited T4 means the external perichondrium of the thyroid cartilage is not breached. We are removing the entire thyroid cartilage, so cartilage invasion is not a contraindication. And T1 to T3 supraglottic. Contraindication is based on thyroid, is the superior part which we have preserved, and subglottic involvement because then we cannot preserve the required. So here we are disturbing both the swallowing and speech elements, and therefore the morbidity is aspiration, the voice quality, and sometimes subglottic edema, which we discussed, and airway compromise. Functional restoration, you only have one because that is laryngeal elevation. You need to put the hyoid and the cricoid together and oppose them. And that will, with the hyoid, the tongue base will come down and get opposed to the laryngeal aperture that is formed by the uh, arytenoids. We come to near total laryngectomy, which Dr. Somesh was alluding to. Uh, this is not truly considered a voice preserving laryngectomy because nasal breathing is lost in all of these. And the reason for that is that at least half of the cricoid lamina and most of the cricoid arch is involved, is removed. So once you remove that, you have severely narrowed the subglottis, and it is not enough. The passage is not adequate enough to provide tracheopharyngeal airway and permit nasal breathing. Uh, so it removes the pre-epiglottic space, ipsilateral paraglottic space, nearly all of the thyroidella, one cricoarytenoid joint, ipsilateral subglottis, half of the cricoid lamina, and most of the cricoid arch. This is the only laryngectomy in which you preserve certain larynx and in which you cut below the cricoid. In all other procedures, you have to cut above the cricoid. So this here you can remove half of the cricoid lamina and most of the cricoid arch. So that's the beauty of this. What happens is that in India, we have more of hypopharyngeal cancers than endolaryngeal cancers, and in which pariform cancers comprise a significant number. And for pariform cancers which involve the apex, we have seen that because it abuts the paraglottic space and the cricoid, we cannot do any of the standard cricoid preserving partial laryngectomies. So once we have to remove the cricoid, we have to resort to a Pearson's near total laryngectomy. TPSS is tracheopharyngeal speaking shunt. So from the remaining larynx, which is basically one require retinoid joint with its muscle and nerve. See, whenever you preserve a functional unit, you have preserved the all the three elements: the nerve, the muscle, as well as the skeleton. So indication is T3, T4 laryngeal and T3, T4 pariform. You can even go and dissect maybe a one of the tracheal rings. So that's the beauty of this procedure. Contraindication, posterior midline is involved. We cannot do that. So for post-cricoid and posterior commissure and inter-arachnoid disease, we cannot do this. Management or restoration is function is by creating a trachopharyngeal speaking shunt. We can restore voice, but they will end up with a permanent tracheostomy, which is not an end tracheostomy, but an anterior wall tracheostomy. But the shunt may not function, this TPSS may not function adequately and all. And so the success rate of voice restoration are about 70 to 80%. The voice quality is a little strained in many patients, especially if you have resected a lot of hypopharynx, uh, which forms an important part of the vocal tract, which gives resonance to the voice. And there could be minor aspiration, which usually comes out of the stomach to liquids. And aspiration is generally not a problem with this. The advantages of vertical voice I mean, the advantages are not vertical, but voice preserving laryngectomies, open procedures, are they have excellent local control rates because we excise larger margins. They can effectively deal with moderately advanced disease, like we have seen. The specimen evaluations and margin assessment is easier and simpler compared to endoscopic laser resections. There is no immediate repeat assessment. Assessments are needed because we know how much we have resected and confirmed that maybe with a fourth section. Adjuvant radiotherapy can be given to these patients who undergo partial laryngectomy. Limited mouth opening is not a barrier, which is a very common issue in our part because of the tobacco and peanut chewing. And it is widely practicable. You don't need any special device, uh, a very high-end technology to do that. This can be done in any operation theater. The disadvantages are that they result in greater surgical trauma with greater inflammation, edema, and time to complete healing with fibrosis. We have to create a passage across normal tissue just to gain access to the sac. So that causes excess scarring and delayed healing. It results in temporary disturbances of swallowing, in supraglottic, and inferior speech quality in glottic due to a disassembly. This is compared to endoscopic procedures. It carries the risk of pharyngocutaneous fistula, yes, because you have cut across, it's a transcutaneous procedure. Uh, this would apply to supraglottic horizontal laryngectomies, where you actually enter the pharynx, and supracricoid laryngectomies, where you again enter the pharynx. This does not apply to a vertical partial hemilaryngectomy. They require hospitalization, preparatory custom. And again, this excising larger margins is a benefit, it's advantage as well as disadvantage. You remove a lot of mucosa and structures which you could have preserved if you resorted to an endoscopic technique. So that's an additional loss. What are the advantage? What are the alternatives to open partial laryngectomy? In disease without framework involvement, in which there is no involvement of the paraglottic space, pre-epiglottic space, or the exoskeleton, that is the cartilages, we can do a natural orifice stalls, that is transoral laser surgery or transoral robotic surgery, or you can resort to non-surgical approaches of radiation, chemoradiation. But disease with framework involvement, well, ideally, TOLs and TORs are not indicated, except in extremely experienced hands, some T3 tumors, and some have even excised some T4 tumors. But normally, a framework involvement is a contraindication to doing an endoscopic partial laryngectomy. Current era, we have a lot of good lasers. So modern lasers for superficial early disease, that's T1, T2 disease. For deeper early disease, properly product classified, we have the European classification units. So subepithelial chordectomy, subligamental chordectomy, where you remove the epithelium, remove the vocal ligament, you cut across the vocalis muscle, that's type 3. Total or complete chordectomy. So you are removing the complete cord, but that doesn't mean that all of that was involved, because if all of that was involved, you need to go beyond and reset the thyroid as well, or at least the pericardium, which means we are at the most we are dealing with either a T1 or a T2 a lesion of the glottis. So all these, even though they remove so many structures, they relate primarily to the lateral mucosal spread, not the deeper spread. So you can resect the arytenoid if it extends on the arytenoid mucosa. You can resect the ventricular fold if it cuts across uh, uh, the ventricle. Now, this is a slightly difficult area because any tumor which cuts across uh, which goes from ventricle, which goes from the glottis to the supraglottis is dangerous. So anything which goes from glottis to supraglottis anteriorly at the anterior commission possibly can be resected, uh, but not which goes laterally across the ventricle, because then we know that the paraglottic space is free. There are no membranous structures to prevent disease spread of the paraglottic space. So these are the limitations of endoscopic lasers, but it's a good tool to treat T1, T2 lesions of glottis and supraglottis if you have a good mouth opening, good visualization, and especially in patients who have a poor pulmonary function and would not tolerate an open partial laryngectomy very well. If you compare, now this is a very rough comparison, but you can see that the local control with an open procedure is probably the best compared to laser and radiation. And therefore, the chances of laryngeal preservation are also very high, uh, which means because these patients of head and neck cancer, they usually succumb primarily to local regional disease. So you can ensure that you can ensure in larger percentage a uh, lar- laryngectomy-free survival, which was the prime objective of the RTOG trial of chemoradiation. So a laryngectomy-free survival. The problem was that in those times, it was believed that only a total laryngectomy for T3 and T4 tumors was the option, surgical option, and therefore these chemoradiation options were explored. But with a proper selection of patients, we can offer one, um, sorry, twice preserving laryngectomies to a fair number of these patients. But the voice quality obviously is poorer, and these can also be used for salvage after radiation failures, provided they were suitable for a partial laryngectomy earlier also before radiation. Open versus endoscopic procedure. Uh, yes, many of the T1, T2 lesions can be addressed endoscopically as well, like we discussed. So, in the current era for locally advanced disease, non-surgical organ preservation has gained a lot of acceptance, but we must be careful about offering both the options if they are available to the patient before we just suggest non-surgical laryngeal preservation. Supraglottic and SCL in the current era, again, you see the local control and laryngeal preservation rates therefore are very high. Uh, Supraglottic obviously doesn't disturb speech elements, so the voice quality is very good. Supracricoid disturbs, so it's not very, it's a whispering kind of a voice most of the time. And that again is a very rough comparison of different modalities between open laryngectomies, endoscopic laryngectomies, and non-surgical voice preservation options. So, in summary, open partial laryngectomy offers a wide variety of techniques. It's suitable for early to moderately advanced lesions, and local control rates and ultimate laryngeal preservations are the highest that can be obtained with any approach. What about patients who need a total laryngectomy? What can we do about them? We have seen the indications, the contraindications, all of the functions are lost. What need to be rehabilitated is swallowing. To restore swallowing, you have to prevent leak that that's prevent a pharyngostoma, a structure, and so we need to adhere to good pharyngeal closure principles. We have to create a good tracheostoma, taking care about where to site it, the size and suturing techniques. And to restore phonation, we need to create a vibratory element connected to vocal tract, which could be mechanical with an electrolarynx or lung powered with use of a PEP valve. So this is about speech rehabilitation, swallowing, breathing, and speech. We consider everything together. The pharyngeal closure has to be tensionless. It should be T or horizontal. We do not do a vertical closure anymore. The extrinsic muscles of the tongue should be incorporated either in the one layer closure or the second layer. The salvage in salvage post hemorradiation, the supplement the primary closure with a soft tissue non-radiated uh, element like you can use the pectoralis major lab. The adequacy of pharyngeal closure is very important. So this is a very old publication from 1984 from the Annals of Otolaryngology, but the principles remain the same. If it is the pharyngeal loss is not exceeding one third of the circumference, you do a primary closure. If it is up to two-thirds, you need to do a patch pharyngoplasty. PM pectoralis major is a good flap. Uh, More than 70%, probably it is best to do a circumferential uh, replacement. Currently, pedicle flaps, if maybe 30% is still there. Otherwise, free flaps are usually used. So, jejunal, pre-jejunal, and in some cases, maybe a radial forearm. Radial forearm, because it has skin, it tends to have uh, uh, a tendency to cause strictures at the mucocutaneous junction. And for all pharyngoesophageal defects, once you have cut across the esophagus, you need to do replace the esophagus and the flaps, large additional flaps is good if the cut in the esophagus is not below the tracheostomy. Otherwise, you need to do a gastric pull-up. The tracheostoma is not to be taken lightly. It's a very important part of the total laryngectomy procedure. You need to create a proper shape, which is the best considered is semi-lunar. So the posterior membranous trachea is cut transversely across, and the anterior cut on the cartilaginous part goes in between cartilages. You do not cut across a tracheal cartilage, and that gives a semi-lunar shape. Ideally, it should be in a separate buttonhole which is created in the lower flap rather than in the upper flap, even though that can be done. But this is the preferable to have a buttonhole in the lower cervical skin flap in which you create the tracheostoma. The size should be just adequate to be occluded, not be too wide that it cannot be occluded for speaking, and it should not be too narrow also that it needs a tracheostomy tube to keep it patent. Uh, Site. So how do you depend? Generally, the thumb rule is used. It should, the patient thumb should be able to cover that. The site, I've already told you, and the suturing. The suturing should be such that the cartilage is not exposed at the cut end. So you take a bite in the skin, take a bite in the trachea, and then to reverse the stitch and take a bite again under the in a dermal plane, deep dermal plane. So the skin gets gathered over the tracheal, the cartilaginous cut margin, and that aids better healing and prevents stenosis and scarring there. Speech rehabilitation. What are the essential elements of speech? So we need a driver, that's an airflow, which could be lung powered speech, esophageal speech, or a pharyngeal. This is practically out. Some patients can learn this. Lung powered is the best because it gives you good velocity and momentum. Vibrator, you need a vibrator which could be the pharyngopharyngeal segment or the floor of mouth tissues when you are using an electrolarynx. You need a resonator. which is the remnant vocal tract because some of the hypopharynx is lost. Uh, so the more of pharynx you remove, the poorer the speech. The vocal tract is the tube formed by larynx, pharynx, and the oral cavity. And you need an articulator, which are obviously preserved to a larynx. You need a driver, vibrator, resonator, and articulator. Speech rehabilitation, esophageal speech, PEP, and electrolarynx are the current options. This is usually not learned by more than say 10 to 20% of people. It is a low volume speech and it's difficult to master. The preferred options are either a tracheoesophageal puncture and an indwelling valve or use of an electrolarynx. This is the comparison between uh, the esophageal speech and a TEP speech compared to normal speech. So the driver is a lung tidal volume of the lung, powered air. Here it is a tidal volume lung powered air. Here it is direct. Here it is indirect, which is diverted into the esophagus. And here it is only upper esophageal air. So this is almost 500 ml. This is 500 ml. This is less than 100 ml. So this is not a good volume speech. A vibrator is a true vocal cord. This is a PE segment and PE segment. Now, PE segment is not just the the upper esophageal sphincter, but it extends to involve the inferior constrictor and part of the middle constrictor as well. So this is a broad area which overlies definitely the entire C4 vertebra and maybe a little part of the C3 and upper part of C5 as well. The resonator is here is normal, so a good speech, and here it's the remnant pharynx. So the speech quality is definitely poorer compared to a normal speech, even if it would be. TB, when should be done, the tracheoesophageal puncture? It can be done as a primary case at the time of laryngectomy or secondarily after everything has healed and radiation is over. If you are doing post-radiation, you must wait at least 6 weeks, preferably 3 months before you attempt to do it. Uh, the common valves are available are these. Uh, Provox is the more commonly used here. And what are the essential requirements for a successful PEP? I call that PNF. The tissue condition, so the pharynx should be pliable and securely juxtaposed. The esophagus and tracheal wall should be securely juxtaposed. Uh, and the PE segment should not be hyper or hypotonic. Patient should have enough good neuromuscular skills and should be adequately motivated. So tissue condition, neuromuscular skills and motivation are essential. What are the determinants of success of a TEP puncture and artificial valve speech? Obviously, neuromuscular and pulmonary functions have to be adequate, so they should not have severe emphysema or COPD. The stoma, size, shape, and level. So size, and shape we have discussed. Level is that normally once you create a tracheostomy after a total laryngectomy, it's in the space of burns in the suprasternal notch, and the sternal heads of these sternomastoids stand out prominently, and the stoma lies in a cusp depressed from the surrounding areas. So if you just cut across, divide the sternal heads of the sternomastoid, uh, this area gets flattened and it's easier to occlude and it functions better. So you have to level that area. The E segment, normally it is recommended that if you're doing a primary laryngectomy, primary TEP, must do a myotomy at that time. Uh, Unless you are doing a salvage after chemoradiation, uh, you could avoid doing myotomy at that time because the chances of a leak are much higher in this setting of a pharyngo and formation of pharyngocutaneous especially. Neurectomy is not done along with the myotomy anymore because it may lead to a more hypotonic segment. Uh, Botox is used for secondary PEP procedures where the voice is not being produced or it's a very staccato and spasmodic voice. So Botox helps to relieve the spasm of the PE segment. So only in selected cases, but a fair number could need when you are doing a secondary TEP. Strictures have to be ruled out and prevented. How to assess CP segment? The best is a video fluoroscopic test. Give the patient barium, and then you ask them to phonate, and you see the air shadow, whether it passes easily, the barium passes easily or not. So that will tell you whether there is any stricture or disease there, and whether the air releases from the esophagus into the pharynx or not. That would tell you about the spasmodic nature of the P segment. Uh, One test, which is called the TOBS test, is inflating the upper esophagus with air by a tube, which is passed from the nose into the upper esophagus. Uh, you pass it about 25 centimeters, and then you fill the esophagus with air and ask the patient to vocalize. If the patient can vocalize well, you have a good pliable V segment. Uh, how do you pass air? I mean, you can measure the pressure there, you can do a manometry. A simple way of doing it to pass air continuously is I would connect that catheter to pass from the nose in across the B segment in the upper esophagus to the anesthesia machine and start oxygen at say about 1 liter per minute, and that gives enough air there in the with not too much also. And if with that the patient can phonate, that's a good test that your secondary TB is going to work. If that is not there, you should first resort to speech therapy measures, and if nothing works, then you need to do a botox. The neuropharynx, like I said, should be pliable, so post radiation may be a problem. Tubular, so and spacious. So tubular means that say after post gastric pull-up, EEP can still be done as a secondary procedure, and the results are better if you have the tubularized stomach rather than the entire stomach. And a spacious pharynx, that's a spacious vocal tract, is important for a good amplitude and resonance of the voice. The processes should be well-fitting, patent, and not leaking. So, how do you choose a well-fitting prosthesis? How to maintain patency, and how not and how to prevent a leaking or day-to-day issues. Uh, Generally, a prosthesis which is 8 to 10 millimeter length is chosen, and the puncture should not be too wide, and it should fit well into the process. The process should fit well into that. The patient has to brush and clean the processes 2 3 times a day to keep it patent and prevent aspiration the deposits of crust on the tracheal surface. Use a humidifier and keep the stoma covered as far as possible. There could be some collection on the esophageal side of mucosa. One easy way to clean that is to use a carbonated ring, a few ounces repeatedly. That easily cleans. And leaks are usually because of candida involvement of candidiasis. Again, cleaning. Use of buttermilk has in some studies been shown to reduce the incidence of candida involvement, but it's not proven. Uh, One must resort to using local statin application. And a processes needs to be replaced only if these things are cannot be corrected by day-to-day measures. Otherwise, processes usually last for a few months. They have been known to last for years, but generally 6 months is the time when you stop change the process. With that, I think I'll end this lecture and let's check if there are any questions there.
Thank you. Thank you. sir. It was such a difficult topic, so well put, especially those charts comparing surgery, laser, and chemo radiation was really outstanding. It's I just know the value of that chart. I hope all the students actually really understand this. It's an extremely tough topic, and the three components of talk: the applied surgical anatomy, and various types of voice preserving surgery and comparison indication, and also the most important is post laryngectomy rehabilitation. This is wonderful topic. It's extremely tough, so well covered by you, Somesh bhai, and I really love those chart comparing in exam. That is what people always ask. How to decide where cricoid is preserved, where cricoid is removed, and which way to do laser, where to not do. It's a very tough topic, very beautifully done, and that actually shows the fact that there are no question in the chat box and question answer. You answered every part. I wish when I was doing MCH, I had such technology from NBE board to actually conduct it. So thank you very much for taking time. And if it's okay, maybe I'll borrow your presentation in PDF format at some time. Most of the students would start bombarding me after this is over. Sir, please request, please send a PDF format of the talk. Over to
Sure,
you.
I'll provide.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Thank you. And over to you, Navneet Singh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Somesh Chandra, for the presentation, and thank you very much, Professor Dr. Somashekar, for joining us. And thank you
I'm
to
sorry. I'm sorry for exceeding my time.
Sir, it's okay. It's absolutely fine. We have this buffer of 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
sir. It was outstanding. I'm ever grateful. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.